What's going on, everybody? Marty, we're back, baby. Fantasy Premier League.
Reunited, and it feels so good.
I know. So this is the first time we're doing this on YouTube, at least on my YouTube channel. Last season, we did a few podcasts. It was fun. We kind of stopped in like December, January-ish, and kind of just moved on. You know what happened? I was upset with my team. I got tired of the season, and I was upset with two teams: my Fantasy Premier League team and Jose Mourinho's Tottenham Hotspur. So I was kind of dejected. I'm like, I don't want to play FPL anymore. I barely want to watch the game anymore. And then you know how that goes.
I know, yeah. I mean, I've never given up on FPL. I've had moments in the past, like 4 or 5 seasons ago, where I kind of lost interest. But last couple seasons, I've really been pushing, trying to hit top 10K, which I haven't yet hit. I'm getting close. Last year was 28K. The year before, somewhere around there as well. But cracking that top 10K in the world is so hard, especially with every year there's more players. I think last year there was over 8 million players. I'm sure there's people out there with like 10 teams, but either way, 8 million users. I imagine this year there's going to be, probably 8.5, maybe even close to 9 million players this year. So it gets harder every year.
Yeah, it keeps growing. The Premier League's getting bigger and bigger. I mean, that TV deal from a few years back has just helped explode it, or explode the exposure of the Premier League, especially here in North America. But anyway, let's get into it. That's one thing we should probably talk about too, is not getting dejected halfway through the season and stop playing. It's not that serious. Just keep playing. It's all for fun. But anyway, so this is a pure FPL Fantasy Premier League season preview heading into the season, which kicks off on Friday. We're just a few days away. So me and Marty are going to get into it. But first, before we move into this season and our strategies and our picks and our tips, we should probably talk about how to play FPL for the novice or for the beginner. Very basic, Marty. Everyone who's played it knows it's a simple Fantasy Premier League game. You have 15 players to pick from. 11 players start week in and week out.
So you need 2 goalkeepers, 5 defenders, 5 midfielders, and 3 forwards to round out your team. Like you said, only 11 can start, 4 on the bench. And you kind of can, you can pick from any team, obviously, but you can only have a maximum of 3 players from one team. So even if one team you think is going to be running away with the league, scoring 5 goals a game, like Man City, for example, you can't roll with their whole team and just play Man City players all season. So you can only have a max of 3 players from one specific Premier League side. And the players are priced all over the board. The pricing varies. Goalkeepers are as low as 4 million up to 5.5. Defenders are as low as 4 up to 7.5. Midfielders have the biggest variety, all the way down from 4.5 up to 12.5, which is Mohamed Salah. And then the forwards, I think the lowest for them is 4.5 as well, up to Harry Kane, who is 12.5. So a lot of different prices, different ranges, depending on skill, depending on what team they play for. All these things factor in last season, this season. So lots to think about and lots to choose from when it comes to FPL for sure.
Yeah, when it comes to lineup changes and transfers, you can make unlimited changes before the kickoff of the season, which is on Friday. As many as you want. You won't get penalized. You don't have to use transfers. But you do get 1 free transfer per week. You'll be charged points if you make more than 1 or 2 free transfers, because if you don't use a transfer in 1 week, it rolls over to 2, but you'll never have more than 2. But if you want to make more changes, then you're going to get penalized, and then you really need to decide if it's worth it to, what is it, Marty, -4 points per extra transfer?
Yeah, -4 per extra transfer. And ideally, you want to take as few of those over the course of the season as possible. If you look at whether it's in the overall rankings or even in your mini leagues against your friends and family, if you take, 10 hits over the course of a season, that's 40 points. Well, that could be the difference between finishing first in your mini league or second and third after 38 game weeks. So ideally, you want to plan ahead. You want to strategize. You will be forced into taking hits, or even sometimes not forced, but you want to. Maybe there's a player whose price is going to go up or down, and you're forced into a move because of injuries. You don't want to use a wild card. You don't want to use one of your chips. And these are things we'll talk about during the segment. But sometimes you're forced into these moves. But ideally, you don't want to take them every week because they accumulate really quickly and they can kind of spin out of control really fast.
Yeah, don't forget, you got to set your team 90 minutes before kickoff. That's basically locked. You can't make any more changes to your side. And you wrote down here, Marty, a little tip. Don't forget to set your bench order. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so every week, if you look at your FPL lineup, you pick your 11 players, you pick your captain and your vice captain, which we'll talk about as well. But the order of which the players are on your bench is really important as well. The goalie will always be on the one side. You only have one backup goalie in case yours doesn't play. But there are automatic substitutions in FPL. So if your one of your midfielders is injured in the warm-up or just doesn't get selected and doesn't feature in that matchup at all. If he plays 1 minute and touches the field, the points will count towards your team. But let's say you have Mahrez on Man City and you get hit with that Pep roulette. He plays a completely different starting 11 than you expected, and Mahrez doesn't play at all.
Yeah.
Well, the player in the first position on your bench will be the guy who will be subbing in for Mahrez. There is a caveat to that, though. For example, you always have to play 3 defenders. So if you have 3 defenders on your starting team and one of your defenders doesn't play, a midfielder won't suddenly sub in for a defender. It'll be the first defender on your bench that comes in. But typically, the first player on your bench is who subs in first. So let's say the first guy on your bench isn't the guy you think is your most important 12th man who might sub in. Make sure you swap them around, because there's been so many times where players haven't played and you've got a guy on your bench with 15 points, and because he's in the second position, he's not the one that subs in. So always make sure you organize your bench as well as your starting lineup.
Yeah, don't get too frustrated when that happens, because it actually happens a lot more than you think. At least it happens to me every single season. Marty, selection tips for the first-time player. Where to start? I think number one is probably you look at the fixture list. And thankfully on Fantasy Premier League website, they have something called the Fixture difficulty rating, where they rank matches based on difficulty, from 1 being the easiest and 5 being the hardest. I don't really ever see 1 or 5 all that often, but that's probably one of the first places you want to go, right, when selecting a player?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you open up FPL, you're looking at rounding out your team here. Let's say I'm opening it up right now. I'm looking at Mo Salah on Liverpool. You click the information button beside his name. You have his history, so you can look at his past seasons. Let's say you're totally new to the Premier League into FPL and you want to see what kind of player this is. They give you a little rundown on his goals scored, assists, clean sheets, and bonus points accumulated, as well as minutes played, which is really good. And you can look at his scoring history from past seasons. So last year he scored 231 points. Great season and a great asset there. But if you switch over to the fixtures tab, that's where you see, like you mentioned, and they color-coded it, which is nice too, which really helps. Obviously, the green fixtures are the better fixtures. So for them, they open up with 2 green fixtures which have an FDR of 2, which is easy. So on this scale. And then a neutral match is rated as a 3, and they have that grayed out. And then the red matches are labeled as 4. And you're right, you don't see too many listed as a 5, especially for top teams. You might see that, like, let's say you look at a player who is on a promoted team like Brentford, Norwich City, someone like that, and they play Man City, they play Liverpool, especially away from home. You might see those listed as 5 on the FDR scale. But typically when you're looking at the prime FPL assets, these guys who are big hitters, you won't see too many very difficult fixtures. And always take that with a grain of salt. Of course, you look at a matchup or a run of matchups where it's green. I mean, they could always blank. They could always have a game where they don't score. And even when you have a top player in the Premier League, they can still score in these matchups even if they have a tough fixture. So, for example, Liverpool in game week 3, they play Chelsea, which is listed as 4, which is red. Right. Well, a match against Chelsea, yes, it's a harder match, but don't suddenly think that your top players are not going to perform in those games. Of course, take that into account for weaker teams, but when you're looking at your best players, the FDR is a really good indicator of run of fixtures, when you can get like 5 or 6 games in a row where you can pick up a player and he's got a lot of better games coming up. Not necessarily easier games, but better in terms of fantasy scoring.
And I think one tip we haven't really touched on is try and actually watch the games. I feel like a lot of players don't. They just go in, they look at stats, they look at numbers and make their selections based on that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes that pays off, right? You look at expected goals, XG, all that type of stuff. And, teams that they're playing, where they're playing, home or away. But watch the games, understand how these teams play, and understand why they're rated, how they're rated on the FDR. Why is Liverpool against Norwich, why is that listed as a 2 or a 1 for Liverpool? And it's because Liverpool obviously is the superior team. They're going to have more of the ball against Norwich, who will probably concede a lot of goals this season. I mean, at least I think so. So for the new player, they're going to gravitate towards the top guys when selecting their team, obviously. Mohamed Salah, Bruno Fernandes, Kevin De Bruyne, Harry Kane, and Lukaku, if he ever ends up joining Chelsea and enters the game. But where do you save? That is probably one of the most important things I feel when selecting your team, because you got to work under a £100 million budget, so you can't just pick anybody you want. where do you look to save first? Do you look at teams maybe who would finish more in the middle or bottom half of the table and look at their fixtures and trying to steal a couple players from there?
For sure. And the problem with this is, I mean, you can save in terms of what positions you want to target and where you think you can get good value for your money spent. So for me, that's the goalkeeper position, and usually defense as well. And I like to spend more of my money on the midfielders and the forwards. But also, like you said, those mid-table teams, even lower half-table teams, you can find players who will perform well in FPL. Obviously, if you're new to the game, you'll look at a team, like Man City, like Liverpool, Chelsea. There's a few of these, the traditional top 6 and even top 8. You'll get a lot of goals. You'll get clean sheets. You'll get the point scorers. And the problem with that is, number one, like we talked about earlier, you can only have 3 players from a single team. But number 2 is these players are usually higher priced. And even if you want, let's say you wanted 3 Man City players and you look at their team, well, yes, you can save money by grabbing a Man City player who might not be a starter, but then you have the risk of him not playing week to week. You have, obviously you could look at other players in that same price bracket from lower teams who are outscoring him. So don't necessarily look at the teams, but also look at the players on those teams. Like you said, you watch the games. And a perfect example of that for me, and we'll touch on this a little bit more when we get through some of the teams to target and some of the players to target, but right. A team like West Ham last year, or even this year, a team like Leeds United, even Leicester City, I think has some players who are very fairly priced and kind of in that mid-range or lower range bracket depending on their position. And you want to kind of fill your team with players from the premium top 6, top 4 clubs as well as these mid-table teams, because that's how you will get a well-rounded team and you'll find ways to save to make sure you can fit those players in. But for me, positionally, where I like to save is always in the goalkeeper position. I don't think I've ever started a season with a goalkeeper higher than 4.5. And usually, I know there's goalkeepers who are 4.0. It's very rare that you find a starting goalkeeper priced at 4.0, which is the lowest. Mm-hmm. So usually, I like to look at that 4.5 price bracket first, and then if I have to, I'll work my way up to the 5.0. And even more rare than me grabbing a 5.0 goalkeeper is a 5.5, just because I'd rather save that £1 million and spend that on my midfield, most likely this season, or even my forwards. It really makes a difference if you look at, let's say you have 5.5 or 5 to spend on your fourth or fifth midfielder, depending on your formation. But then if you downgrade your goalie, and then you get that $1 million, and you can look at the 6 or 6.5 bracket for midfielders, the jump in quality is very high. And I think this year, like most years, you can find a good 4.5 price goalkeeper. And for me, there's a couple, but Robert Sanchez from Brighton is one for sure. Bachmann from Watford, if you want to be a little riskier because they're a promoted side. Those are 2 guys that I like right now. I have Sanchez in my team. I just think the price is perfect, and I can use that extra $1 million or even $500,000 elsewhere in my team. So goalkeeper is somewhere that I'm always going to save.
Yeah, I'm with Sanchez as well. I think a lot of players are. Brighton, decent team as well. Really decent team. I mean, we'll talk about them and where we think where they're going to finish this season. And if they, I think if they get a striker, invest in the club in a little bit, they can have a shot at finishing in the top half of the table. So we'll see what happens there. But great tips on the goalkeeper. Definitely give me that $1 million. Let me put it toward, or £1 million, and put it toward a midfielder or a forward. So every week you're going to have to captain one of your players, and that captain will have their points doubled that week. So this is something to really think about. You don't need to get too complicated with it. Look at the fixture schedule. Like I said before, if Liverpool are playing Norwich that week, most likely Mo Salah is probably going to be the best captain choice because he's likely going to score a goal, maybe 2, as well as get some bonus points and have that doubled. And you have a player who's in double digits ending that game week, Marty. Am I missing anything when it comes to captaining players?
No, I mean, that's pretty much it. For the most part, I like to captain my big hitters on my team, the guys who put up, double-digit hauls often. Every now and then, you can look at your team, and maybe you have a player from, Leeds, a player from West Ham, or even just a player on a good team, but he's not one of your top 1 or 2 players, and you'll captain them kind of as a differential. But for me, I like to play it safe. I will always pick 2 players every season, and almost every week, I'll captain one or the other. So, for example, right now in my team, I have Mo Salah and Bruno Fernandes as my two premium players, both priced at 12 and above. And at least for the first probably 6 or 7 weeks, at least 6 weeks, week 3 is a bit tricky with those two. I mean, Bruno plays Wolves in week 3, which is probably better than Salah playing Chelsea. But every week I'm going to be captaining one of those guys, more so Salah than Bruno. But you want to kind of have 2, maybe 3 players you lean on as your captains over the course of a season, just so that I feel like when you have to make less decisions, it makes FPL a little bit more enjoyable. Like if you had 6 guys and you're debating between, or even less than that, 4 guys every week, and you're debating, these are my 4 best players. I didn't really go with premiums. I kind of went with 4 slightly lower priced guys, and they're my premium players. Having that, I guess, that extra decision to make every week between who's in your lineup and also who you're captaining, it's going to drive you crazy. So stick with 2, maybe 3. That seems to be my magic formula, I guess, in terms of captain picks. And right now, that's the way I've built my team: is 2 premiums. And then a few players kind of in a bracket below them, and then filling in the blanks with some value players. And it just makes it so much easier. And I think that over the course of the season, you will get the captain pick wrong. Like, don't freak out if, obviously, 1 week I captain Salah, he gets me 6 points, which is just a clean sheet and 90 minutes played or whatever. And then Bruno goes off, gets 4 penalties. It's going to happen. You won't always get your captain pick right. As long as you get it right more often than not, you're going to do well. And I mean, it's just one of those things. There's some luck, there's some skill, and I mean, at the end of the day, you're just trying to have a good time and do well. So
exactly. And the thing is, you're right. Just keep it simple. Don't go crazy. I mean, like you said, you captain Salah against Norwich, he does nothing. But if you play that match, 10 times, 8 out of the 10 times, he's probably going to score a goal, maybe 2. So that's kind of how you got to look at it. Obviously, I mean, it's a sport. It's real life. Things are going to happen. Players are going to miss. Players are going to get injured. Players can sub off early, whatever may be the case. But, try and keep it as simple as possible. Marty, I'm leaving this to you. Wild cards and chips. Go.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a thing that a lot of new players probably don't really understand and understand the strategy behind it, too. Because it's one thing to look up the description of a chip or the wild card and to be like, oh, okay, I got it. Like, that's no problem. I'll use this. But it's a lot more than that. So every year you get 2 wild cards. I'll start with those. So, of course, right now is not a time you need to worry about your wild card. It only really goes into effect once the season starts, because up until that first game week is locked, you have unlimited transfers. And that is basically what a wild card is. You have unlimited transfers for that game week. So they're free of charge. You can make 50, 60, 70 transfers, tinker your team, play around for hours and hours on end, and you will not face any penalties or anything for your team that week. And you get 2 of them per season. There is a bit of a thing that you need to be aware of, though. Every year when you get 2 wildcards, you do have to use one of the wildcards by the new year, or in this case, it's the last game week right before the new year. So the Premier League's already given us the date for that, which is December 28th this season. So just based on how the schedule works, that'll be the last game of the new year until the New Year's Day games. So that's the last time you can use your wild card. So even if you feel like you haven't needed it up until that point, you have to use it or lose it. So even if you just use it for 2 transfers at that stage, use it. But the thing with a wild card is you want to be strategic with it. You don't want to use it in week 1 or week 2. I mean, you will see a lot of people, especially as you get into this, use an early wild card. And unfortunately, you're kind of forced into it a lot of the time just because of transfers, injuries. Maybe you take a punt on a player and it doesn't work out. You think somebody's going to be a crazy differential and value, and they haven't seen the field in the first 3 game weeks. So sometimes you're forced into these early wild cards, which is okay. You have a second one that you can use at another time, so that in the second half of the season there. So it's a very, very important tool. It's a very valuable tool. And the one thing that a lot of people like to target, myself included, is you'll see over the course of a season, well, hopefully there aren't many COVID cancellations or rescheduled games this year, but there's always cup games that come into play, and you see games getting rescheduled for later in the season. So one thing a lot of people like to do is, especially if you can hold your wild card or even your second wild card as long as possible, wait for those games because they're what's called a double game week or sometimes a triple game week. So let's say Manchester United goes on a FA Cup run So does Everton, so does Arsenal, and Norwich City. Those are the FA Cup semifinalists. They have to reschedule those games for a later date. So whatever week those semifinals are being played, they won't play in the Premier League. But another week, they're going to play twice. So those are the weeks you want to kind of plan ahead for. Have your wild card ready so you can bring in some of those players and have everybody play twice on your team, or a lot more players play twice instead of once. So that's kind of my main tip for wild cards is don't feel like you have to hang on to it and keep it in your back pocket if your team is struggling. You have red flags, injuries everywhere. If you have to use one early on, especially after the international break, I feel like a lot of people use it because that's kind of when the transfer window is going to close this year. Maybe Harry Kane moves to Man City and you want to get him in your team. Maybe there's another big transfer. So something like that is a perfect time to use a wild card. But for me, I like to hold it unless I am absolutely forced into using it, or when it's a strategic move like double game weeks, triple game weeks, something like that.
Chips, they can be very useful as the season goes on, and if used wisely, can really help you maximize points on any given game week, especially the triple captain, which, as you mentioned, during a double game week, you hammer, let's say, I'll go back to it, Mo Salah has, back-to-back matches, or Liverpool has back-to-back matches against favorable opponents. That's probably a player you're going to want a triple captain to get the most points out of. But I'll let you get into that. Triple captain, bench boost, and free hit.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example. A double game week is really one of the best times to use, either your bench boost or your triple captain. But here's a little summary on each chip, just so that people are aware of what they are, what they do. And also the most important thing as well is you only get one of these per season. So unlike the wild card where you get two, you only get one chip per season. And there's another element as well. You can't use your wild card and a chip in the same week. So let's say Liverpool's a perfect example, Mo Salah. They have a double game week. You don't have him, and the only way you can get him into your team is a wild card. Unfortunately, you can't use your wild card and then also use like the triple captain chip in the same week. So you kind of have to plan ahead, do it the week before, and then you can use your triple captain chip if that was your move. So the three chips are the bench boost, like you mentioned, which is pretty straightforward. So the points scored by your bench players in that game week are included in your total. So typically, only the 11 players on your starting lineup count towards your score for the week. But in this week, when you use that chip, all the points off your bench go towards your total score, which, again, for me, strategically, that's something where, again, if you can target the double game weeks, that's a perfect time. Or even just sometimes you'll find that although you don't have double game weeks, all the players on your bench have very favorable matchups. And then you can possibly get an extra clean sheet. Maybe a guy gets a goal and an assist. And even though you're not getting two games from each player on your bench, you're still getting some points. And it does go a long way if you can hit a big week with the bench boost. So it's a great chip to use. I like to wait later in the season for that one, once you kind of get those rescheduled games, the double game weeks and that. So hold the bench boost pretty much always until the second half of the season. I don't remember a time where I've used it early on.
I don't remember a time where I've actually even used bench boost, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't use it. It's probably best to, like you said, strategize and figure out the correct time to do so. Yeah. To use the bench boost, especially if you can stack that bench, one game week or for a double game week or whatever. So that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's one of those trips I always know I'm going to use later on in the season. And really all three, I try to wait until at least the second half of the season to use, just so I know kind of what's going on with rescheduled games. I know exactly what I'm heading into. And the worst part about using it early on in the season is, what if you use your bench boost in week 5 and then you could have used it in week 32 when when every team plays twice, for example. So it's worth holding on to for sure. So is the triple captain, and it's kind of the same strategy. I mean, you don't have to target a week where you have double game weeks. Again, it's a perfect time to do it, and sometimes you get the perfect storm. Like last year, we saw triple game week. Manchester United had one, and everybody was triple captaining Bruno. Some people had Greenwood, and if you hit on a triple game week and your guy gets 15 points, well, instead of getting 30, you're getting 45, and you can really, really climb the overall rankings. And even in your mini leagues with you hit the triple captain. But that's something, again, it sounds like it's too easy, but waiting for double game weeks, there's always going to be at least one or two of them in a season for at least some teams, just because you'll always see these top 6, top 4 clubs do well in the domestic cups, the FA Cup, the Carabao Cup, So there will be rescheduled games for these teams, even if it's not the top 6. Sometimes the top 10 teams go on a bit of a cup run and their games get rescheduled as well. And the one thing that's nice about Manchester United doing well and going on a cup run, or Arsenal or Tottenham or whoever, is there's always another team in that fixture as well whose game get rescheduled. So even if one team does well in the FA Cup, 2 teams are getting a double game week because the other team in that fixture has to replay that as well. So I like the bench boost. The triple captain is something I like to wait on. Target double game weeks if possible, or even just a really, really good fixture. If you see one team, let's say Harry Kane moves to City and they're playing the worst defense in the league later this season, well, that's a perfect time to triple captain if you don't have any double game weeks available to you. So it really is the ultimate. It's the biggest chip, I think, in terms of big totals, big numbers, if you can hit it. So save the triple captain, like I said, for later this season. And the one that kind of is a bit different is the free hit. So the free hit is something that, yes, you can use in a week where you have a double game week, but the free hit can kind of be used, in my opinion, in those game weeks where all those games have been rescheduled. So it's kind of one of those things where, let's say your team is very heavy on these teams who are going on cup runs, and it's the weekend of the FA Cup quarterfinals, and all 8 quarterfinalists are Premier League teams. So you've got 16 teams who have to have their games rescheduled. So there's only 4 teams playing in the Premier League that season, just hypothetically, right? So if that were to be an actual game week, most of your team is wiped out. So you have to make the decision, do I play my FPL week with, 2 players, or do I take a free hit this week and get a starting lineup of the remaining teams? So that it can be used on a double game week to maximize the amount of players you want, or it can be used kind of the opposite, when there's almost no games being played. And I think this is one, again, that you want to wait and hold for at least maybe even over the Christmas period and beyond, just because of injuries, because of rescheduled games. They all kind of go hand in hand. Rescheduled games are the biggest factor in FPL for chips, in my opinion. You always want to target rescheduled games in one way or another, whether that's using the free hit, where you can make unlimited transfers for 1 week. So it's like your Wildcard, but only for 1 week, and your team gets reset back to the team you had before. So it's an interesting one. And I think my advice to any new player would be, hold your chips, look ahead, see what other people are doing as well. I mean, Twitter's a great tool. You can always tweet me, tweet Albert, whoever you look to for advice in FPL, or even just go with your gut. But I like to wait until at least halfway or beyond to use any of my chips for sure.
Awesome analysis, Marty. I'm sure the people appreciate that. And like Marty said, if you have any questions, because this can be overwhelming. I mean, before you get into it, you're thinking about all these things. You're thinking about chips. You're thinking about who to spend on, double game weeks, triple captains, wild cards. It can really become overwhelming. But once you get into it, you really start to understand it. But if you have any questions, hit us up in the comment below. Like Marty said, you can hit us up on Twitter. Ask us any questions you guys might have. But that's it. That's how you play FPL in a 20-plus minute nutshell. I think you did a pretty good job, Marty.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the most complicated game in the world. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So,
and it's really fun. That's probably the number one thing. It really, especially if you play with some friends, you get a little mini league going. Yeah. I mean, you can play for some money if you want. You have to. We've been in the league together for so long. We've never played for a dime, and it's fun. Bragging rights. You get to watch your team play. You get to watch the Premier League. I mean, nothing better, really. Yeah, exactly. This is something that anybody can do. I mean, kids play it, adults play it. It's so simple. And the one thing that's nice about FPL is that you can literally pick it up and put it down anytime you want. Although, if you get into it like we are, especially, speaking for myself, especially leading into the season starting on Friday, I don't know how many drafts I've made for my team. And over the course of the season, I'm always planning ahead. I'm always kind of looking at my team. And it's nice to, let's say, of course, everybody has most people, they have a favorite Premier League team that they watch. But if you have players on Leeds, if you have players on West Ham and you're not a fan of these teams, it gives you a reason to want to watch those teams and follow those teams and their score lines, as well as just knowing what's going on in the Premier League. So, and you kind of get attached to different players who do well for you in FPL too. So it makes the experience a lot better for sure. It's so funny. You start thinking about past seasons. Every time someone mentions double game week, I think of Sergio Aguero. every
Oh,
single
yeah.
time because
Yeah.
that's just who you captain. He would score. Well, and it's, back in his Man City prime now. Aguero's prime is long gone, but nonetheless, that's a great breakdown of how to play FPL. But let's get into it, Marty. Building for the 2021-2022 season. Let's start off with teams to target. I looked at the first 5 game weeks of some of these teams, but I kind of ranked them. I went Liverpool, Villa, Brighton, Manchester United, and West Ham, and then I have Man City, question marks. Not the easiest, but there might be one player in there that we'll need to look at. Let's talk about Liverpool. First match, away to Norwich. Then they have Burnley, Chelsea, difficult fixture, Leeds and Crystal Palace. So 4 out of 5 are pretty good. And we've been talking about Mohamed Salah a lot. And in that 5 game week stretch, you got to think there's a couple goals in him. And he's on penalties.
Yeah, that's a big thing for sure. And I should have mentioned this as well when we were talking about captains. If you have a player in your team who contributes but is also on penalties, it just gives you that extra element to want that player in your team as a captain because,
right.
Not that a penalty is a sure thing in terms of scoring a goal, but it sure helps if, even though he's not involved in a play, something goes on and then he gets the penalty, he could score the goal and give you those 5 points for Mo Salah being a midfielder. So, Liverpool for me is you have to have at least 1 or 2 players in your team, in my opinion. Or 3. I currently have 3 players in my team right now from Liverpool to start the season. I have Mo Salah, I have Trent Alexander-Arnold, who the 2 most expensive players in their position, Salah being a midfielder and Trent being a defender at 7.5. I just think you have to have these guys. Their opening fixtures are so good.
So good.
I mean, and their production is so good. I know Trent had a bit of a down year last year in terms of his production compared to the previous 2 years in FPL, but I think he's going to be hungry. I think Liverpool this year are going to bounce back, and their offense is going to be clicking. I think Klopp's going to come out kind of pissed off after what happened last year, and all these guys coming back from injury. I really have a good feeling about Liverpool, especially from an FPL point of view with these 2 players. Trent offers so much attacking threat from a defender, and that's why he's priced like a midfielder, because look at his stats. Last year, he had 2 goals, 8 assists, plus he gets the 4 points if they get a clean sheet. The year before, 4 goals, 15 assists, which is crazy. And he had 14 clean sheets that year. So I think Trent, I don't want to say he's a must-own. For me, he is. He's only
a lock, dude.
He's a lock. He's only 31% owned, which is kind of surprising to me. Most Salah is like 50% owned, which I'm not surprised by at all. But
yeah,
both these players, I think, are just almost, for me, they were, as soon as I opened up my first draft in FPL this season, I logged in for the first time, they were the first 2 players in my team. And I think most people should do that. And even though let's say you're someone who wants differentials, look for them elsewhere in your team. I don't think this is one where you want to be cute, you want to be cheeky and avoid these players, because if they hit big in the first 5 or 6 weeks, you'll be playing catch up. So I think they're definitely locks for most people's teams for sure.
Yeah, and the thing with Trent, he's essentially an extra attacker on the Liverpool side. He bombs up and down the pitch. He's used almost as a winger, and he's also on some set pieces, which means he's on some corners and direct free kicks. If it suits a right-footed player, he's usually on it. And to be honest, he's pretty good. I don't know what his conversion rate is on free kicks, but it has to be pretty good because he scored a few last season and the season before that. Another player on that team that a lot of people were looking at was Andrew Robertson, but now I think he's broke his leg or something happened to his leg. Is it a broken leg? No,
it was an ankle injury, and he's actually
ankle
not.
Injury.
It's not as bad as they first thought, but you're still going to be without him for probably about a month or so.
Ligament damage for Andy Robertson,
yeah.
Which means he'll be out. Looks like another defender's coming in, 4.0, attacking fullback for Liverpool. Kostas. This last name is going to kill me, dude. Shimikas. Did I hit it?
Yeah, I think you hit it. He's
Martin,
the new
4.0.
Oh my god. This is one, again, I can only imagine what his ownership's going to be by the time Friday hits. And there's always that bit of worry that maybe James Milner lines up at left back. But for me, this guy is a low risk, high reward player at this point of the season. You can't go wrong with a player who's priced at 4.0, so the lowest you can get on defense, and who may be a starter for their first 4 or 5 games, depending on Robertson's fitness. And even when he's back, he may not start that first game back. So he could, if he plays well, start the first 4 or 5 games of the season for Liverpool, which is absolutely massive. And then even if he loses his place at that point, then you can maybe look at making a move for him or just stash him on your bench because his price is so good. And obviously keep in mind in FPL, we didn't mention this before, but prices do fluctuate over the course of the season. As players get bought, their prices will go up. And as players are sold by other managers, their prices will go down. So his price, I imagine, if he does get a run of games, even when Robertson comes back, he's 4.0 right now. I could see him being 4.2, maybe 4.3 if he gets let's say if he gets 4 or 5 games for Liverpool and they keep clean sheets. I think he's a no-brainer at this point. And like I said, even if he stops playing, just stash him on your bench because he's the cheapest defender you're going to get anyways.
Yeah, and so Liverpool, obviously a great team to target. So let's kind of fly through these teams to target, Marty, because we've got a lot to talk about. But Aston Villa, Brighton, Manchester United, and West Ham. Did I miss any teams there?
Those are I think you got it for sure. I think those are the teams that most people will be looking at based on fixtures. And every year you can kind of decide, are you a form manager or a fixture manager? So do you look at how well the teams and players are playing, or do you look at the fixtures? And obviously right now, you can't look at form. No. Unless you look at preseason form, but really someone can have a crazy preseason and then not even play in the opener. So right now all we have to look at really is fixtures in terms of making our moves and to set yourself up for the start of the season. So those are the teams for sure that I think people should be targeting. And even though those are the teams that we're saying have the best fixtures, we're not telling people not to grab players from, Tottenham, not to grab players from Man City or Chelsea, because we mentioned it before, even though they have a tough fixture, these top teams can score, they can get clean sheets against other good teams. It's just that you want to make it easier on yourself. You want to find these teams that are going to score goals and have easier games. So these, I would say, like you said, looking at Aston Villa, they play Watford, Newcastle, Brentford, Chelsea, and Everton. Those first 3 especially are fantastic. Those are the 3 before the international break.
Yeah.
Aston Villa, it doesn't get much better than that to start a season. Brighton have Burnley, Watford, Everton, Brentford, and Leicester in their first 5, which is, again, very good overall. Brighton I don't love from an attacking point of view, more so on the defensive side of things. I'm targeting at least one Brighton player. And then Man United, you mentioned as well. They have a ton of hitters on their team. You look at someone like Bruno, you look at someone like Luke Shaw. Obviously Jadon Sancho. I just don't think he'll be in the starting lineups on week 1. But
no,
you can't go wrong with these fixtures for a top team like this, especially for a player like Bruno, who was the highest scorer last season at the midfield position. So yeah.
West Ham, and then as I mentioned, Manchester City. Not the easiest fixture schedule, but we'll talk about one player who could potentially get into your starting 11. So let's talk about top tier and value options at each position here. So forward, Marty. As of right now, I don't think there really is anyone worth spending up for. I mean, Harry Kane, we don't know if he's staying at Spurs or going to Manchester City. And if he does stay at Spurs or goes to City, when will he be ready? He hasn't been a part of any preseason. He's currently at the training facility in Tottenham, but I think he's in quarantine since he came back from a trip, I think from Florida or wherever he came from. And another player to potentially look out for is Romelu Lukaku, who is being linked with Chelsea. It looks like that deal is going to be completed any time now. So I think those 2 players are 2 guys you'd probably want to spend up for as the season progresses. But for me, I'm going value. I think Danny Ings, Callum Wilson, Mikel Antonio, Ivan Toney are probably the 4 players that I'm going to look at when trying to fill my forward spots.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, honestly. I think to start the season, especially with the uncertainty around Kane, Lukaku, we don't know his price. We don't know when the transfer is going to be made official. So obviously you can't even have him in your team at this point. But I think, like you said, as the season progresses, as these guys come in and you can see what sort of impact they have, I don't think the transition will be that difficult for Lukaku. Obviously, he's played in the Premier League before, and he might be someone you want to target later on. But I totally agree with you. I think this season, start with mid-range. I would say they're priced at a mid-range point. The guys you mentioned, Danny Ings, I love. Antonio, I love as well. Those are the 2 forwards that I have in my starting 11 right now. Just because at 7.5 and 8.0, I just think the value is good. The fixtures are good. They were both on teams that we mentioned who have good fixtures to start the season. Callum Wilson I do like as well. Something in me doesn't trust Newcastle.
Same. He's
Yeah.
been in and out of my team, and I'm like, it's just Newcastle.
Yeah. It's not that I think he's a good player, and he is a good
he's a
FPL
great player.
player. If you look
Yeah.
at his, I mean, he's 134 points last year, 12 goals, 6 assists. If he can stay fit, and if Newcastle can actually score goals, I think he's a very viable option. It's just to start the season, there's guys I like more.
Right.
And then you also mentioned Ivan Toney, who great year last year in the championship with Brentford. It's just the one thing with any player who's from a promoted team is there's always that, I guess, that uncertainty of how they're going to perform in the Premier League, both individually and their team. So for me, I am interested, and he's been in some of my drafts. He's just not in my current team, but he's on my watch list for sure because at 6.5, I think the price is great. And really, if you look at the forwards, I think someone who's a great example of a mid-range striker who had a great season last year was Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He was priced at 7.0 to start the season, 16 goals, 6 assists. He's at 8.0 this year. He could be someone who ends up in your team at some point this season. Richarlison as well, same team. Kelechi Iheanacho's priced at 7.5. Someone that even Cavani is 8.5 if he can be the starter.
That's someone I haven't even thought about.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really good options, interesting options at the forward position. Even Tammy Abraham, 6.5. There's rumors
Not
he
getting
might
any time at Chelsea though.
No, but there's rumors he may go to Arsenal. We'll see. If he ends up somehow at Arsenal as the number one guy, depending on what happens with Lacazette, maybe that's an interesting one. I mean, obviously don't put him in your team now, but just as you look through the forwards, add players to your watch list, think about them, make note of who could be an option at one point this season, because I think this year, more than most years, there's a lot of really good mid-range forwards, which really helps balance out your squad.
I will say this, though, Marty. I love Danny Ings. Look at that Villa fixture list. Watford, Newcastle, Brentford, Chelsea, yes, difficult, and Everton. He's got goals in those games. And I'm not sure if he's on penalties. It could be Anwar El Ghazi, maybe Ollie Watkins. But if he takes penalties as well, we'll probably find out, hopefully, after the first couple of game weeks. And I think he might be a no-brainer for the first couple game weeks. Midfield, we talked about him so much, but Mohamed Salah got to be in your team. Liverpool have great fixtures. He's on penalties. He's usually their top scorer. For Manchester United, Bruno Fernandes, and the other Manchester City player I was talking about earlier, Riyad Mahrez. Rarely would I ever look to Riyad Mahrez from Manchester City. I'd want Kevin De Bruyne, but he's out for a bit. Maybe even Phil Foden, but he's out for a bit. Jack Grealish is someone also to monitor, but I think he's just been introduced to that team. He had a little cameo in the Community Shield against Leicester City. I think it might take him some time to get into that Manchester City 11. I mean, based on the past, what we've seen with Pep Guardiola bringing in new players, it takes some time for him to put these players in their team and get them up to snuff with how Manchester City play. So for me, I think Mahrez is pretty much a lock to start, at least for the maybe 3 or 4 game weeks coming up.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing as well, and you'll hear this term if you're new to FPL, you may not have heard it, but anyone who is familiar and experienced, you hear the term the Pep Roulette. So it's almost every week it could be a totally new 11. That team is so deep. They have so much depth and quality in the I mean, defensively as well, but their midfielders, their attackers, it's so hard to predict who's going to play week to week. And you might pick up a player and be like, oh, they spent $100 million on Jack Grealish. Well, he's got to be a lock. Well, he might not be a lock for the first few weeks. So right. I do agree with you, though. Mahrez, based on his preseason form, he's playing a lot of minutes. I think based on other players' injuries, based on Grealish only being introduced to the team recently, I think if you're going to go with a Man City player, he's probably the guy. I totally agree. And his price is very good in terms of, well, I think for exposure to Man City, his price is very good, 9.0. If you want someone who is likely going to be in their lineup to start the season. The fixtures are pretty good overall, not the best. That's why they probably weren't highlighted when we talked about fixtures, but Tottenham away to start the season. They play Norwich in week 2, which is fantastic. Arsenal at home in week 3, which, I mean, that's listed as 3 at FDR, but I imagine they're going to score on Arsenal and probably put away a couple goals past them for sure. Leicester in week 4, which is a tricky one. Southampton in week 5. So kind of an up and down start for them, but the thing is with Man City is they can score against anybody. It's just about finding out which players are actually going to be in that team, and I think Mahrez is probably going to be in that team to start the season for sure.
Marty, how do we feel about Son? An FPL, he was amazing last season. 10 million is his price. I think 17 goals scored and 12 assists last season. No Harry Kane, which is huge for Spurs. They're going to lose a lot of goals there, and potentially a lot of assists are going to be taken away from Son without him there, because those two seem to connect. But after this first game week against Manchester City, they have Wolves, Watford, Crystal Palace. After that, pretty good fixtures. And listen, if Kane isn't playing and he isn't there, Son will most likely be on penalties as well, and will most likely end up as their top scorer come the end of the season. So I think at some point, many people will have him in their teams, but maybe right now isn't the best time to pick him up, considering you can get someone like Riyad Mahrez on arguably a much better team.
Yeah, I agree. He's one that I've been on the fence with to start. Priced at 10.0, which unfortunately it makes it tricky if you have two premium players and then try to fit him in just based on balancing your team.
Right.
If he was 9.5 or 9, I get why he's 10.0. I'm not going to fight the whoever made the pricing, but it's just one of those things that makes it a little tricky at that price point, just because balancing your team and all that. But I definitely see why people have him. I mean, he's owned by 21% right now, which is actually higher than I thought it was. I thought it was
everybody. You know, the thing is, everyone's flip flopping. He's in the lineup an hour later. He's not in the lineup. That's been me all day. I have him in right now, and it kind of works. I'll tell you what I got here, just to let the people know. So I have Son, Fernandez, Salah, Rafinha, and Pascal Gross. Pascal Gross can turn into maybe Benrahma or even Harrison, or Rafinha to Harrison. But I had to throw in 3 4.0 defenders to make that work, and a 4.5 forward. So you're going to have to sacrifice in other positions, whereas if you had Mahrez, you don't really have to sacrifice all that much.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. It's a balancing act. And I think for me, I probably will end up not starting the season with him. Maybe a few weeks from now, Jadon Sancho is a starter for Man U, and I downgrade Bruno to Sancho because I want exposure to Manchester United.
Gotcha.
And then I can kind of upgrade one of my other players and get Son. So kind of that difference in dropping 2.5 mil from Fernandez to Sancho, maybe I can move up elsewhere and have both and balance out my team that way. But for me to start, I think it's tricky just fitting him in my team and being happy with my team, because the one thing I don't want to do as well is force myself into transfers early on. I don't want to have too many players that I know are going to not be in my team long term. And obviously injuries happen, form dips, whatever might go on over the course of a season. But I don't want to have too many players that I'm like, oh, this guy's only in my team for 2 weeks, and then I'm going to move him, because what if I have an injury elsewhere and I kind of get stuck and forced into multiple transfers. So I think for me right now, because there's so much uncertainty for me with Tottenham and the Harry Kane situation, although I think he's a great asset with or without Kane. I just don't want to commit to the price. And I think just based on the way I'm structuring my team right now with my two premiums, Bruno and Mo Salah, I just don't think I can fit him in and be comfortable with the rest of my team. So he's an interesting one for sure, and I get why, a quarter, just not quite a quarter, but 20% of people have him. But for me, I'm gonna hold for now and keep an eye on his form and everything.
Yeah, I'll probably flip-flop up until 1 minute before lock, to be completely honest with you. But we'll see how it goes. Son is having a good preseason, so take that for what it is. Some value options or mid-tier options in the midfield, Marty. Rafinha from Leeds, Jack Harrison. I also threw on Anwar El-Ghazi from Villa, and Benrahma, who seems to be the talk of the FPL town these days. I guess he's having a pretty good preseason. But Rafinha, for me, at his price point, 6.5, pretty good. He had a really great year last year. He should be on some set pieces. He is a goal threat. He's an assist threat as well as Harrison, his teammate, at 6.0, which will be on the other flank. What do you think about those two Leeds players?
Yeah, I definitely think you need one of the two in your team. And for me, this is an example of two players where I look at their opening fixtures and I don't love what I see in the first four.
Not the best.
But after that, game week 5 to 10, even if you look at 11 and 12 as being a rough patch for them, but all the way 5 to 15, they only have 2 bad games, really, after the opening 4. But Leeds are a team who can score against big teams. And even if you look at their first 4, they play Man United away, which On the opening day of the season, anything can happen. Especially Leeds. I love, my favorite team to watch, other than my favorite team, is Leeds in the Premier League. And I think you can't go wrong with either player. I currently have Harrison in my team just to save that 0.5 compared to Rafinha. But I think you can't go wrong with either one. I think depending on the structure of your team and my team as well, I may move back to Rafinha just because I think he does offer a bit more in terms of expected goals, chances created. He's on more set pieces. I know Harrison outscored him last season, but I think a part of that is minutes played, and Rafinha had a bit of an injury at one point and missed some time. But I think these are guys that you keep playing even in tough fixtures. And I mean, in the second game of the season, they play Everton, which, although on paper, in terms of FDR, is listed as a tough fixture, I don't see Everton as being a bad fixture for Leeds at all, especially at home. Then they play Burnley. Liverpool's a tough one for sure after that, but then the run of fixtures between game weeks 5 and 10 especially, but all the way up to game week 15 is really good. And I think these are guys that even if they have a slow start, you hang on to them because you're going to get a lot of points from them all the way up to Christmas, really, if you look at the fixtures. And I think their prices are fantastic. 6.0 and 6.5. They're perfect for that third or fourth spot in your midfield, depending on your formation for sure. I think they're fantastic. A couple other guys you mentioned. I actually knew you were going to put El Ghazi on here, just based on last year. You loved him last year.
I love El Ghazi.
I know you do.
There's a really good player there.
There is a good player. I mean, he scored 10 goals last year. My one concern with him is minutes.
Yeah.
Just because obviously you look at the signings they made with Buendia and Leon Bailey at Aston Villa. I'm not saying he's not going to play. It's just I'm curious to see. Maybe he starts the season out. I think Buendia's out right now. He's not fully fit. So maybe he does start the season ahead of him. But I think when you spend that kind of money on a player like Buendia and just what he offers to the team, I wonder if long-term he might not be a starter in the team and you'll kind of be forced into a transfer. And I kind of feel the same way about Ben Rama. Although he's in my team right now, I love the differential play on him, 6.0. He's only owned by 4% of people right now. And West Ham, we mentioned them as a team with good fixtures, having a great preseason. People, I mean, who knows? But, some people are kind of saying maybe he'll fill that void that Jesse Lingard left after his loan ended. I'm not sure. But if you look,
player, I don't know if he's that good.
I don't know if he's that.
That Jesse Lingard form was unsustainable.
It was crazy. Yeah, exactly. It was crazy. But I mean, even if he doesn't quite hit those levels that Lingard hit last year, even if he can contribute some goals, some assists, there's definitely a player in there. We saw it in the championship. His numbers in the championship prior to moving to West Ham were crazy. He's a goal scorer. He can create. And at 6.0, I don't see it as being too much of a risk. The one thing I just don't love about it, and that's kind of why I'm on the fence, is like I talked about before, I don't want to pick a player that may force me into a transfer. But you can't get all your picks right week one. So if you take a punt on one or two players, it's not the end of the world. And he, for me right now, might be one that I'm looking at as a bit of a differential play.
Defenders, Marty. So the top two guys I have listed on here, Trent Alexander-Arnold, who already talked about, pretty much a lock for us, and Luke Shaw from Manchester United, who's become a very good fullback over the past, I would say, 12 months. I mean, attacking fullback. He's on set pieces for Manchester United. Assist upside is there, especially with Manchester United, the way they play now. Very attacking, a lot of attacking players up front. And when you have a target man like Edison Cavani playing number 9 inside the box, Luke Shaw's value, at least for me, goes up because now he's got this big target in the middle who can score goals. And Cavani likes service, and Luke Shaw will definitely provide that. Before we get into why we should select him, defender strategy. When you're looking at defenders, what's your go-to? Do you look at the best and pay up? Obviously, in this case, it's TAA. Or do you just say, you know what, I'm going to pay down here and throw all my money towards my midfielders and my forwards?
I think for me, it's a combination of the two. I mentioned that, earlier on in the show that I do have Trent in my team right now. I think you said it best. He's basically another attacker for Liverpool.
Yeah.
And Luke Shaw, although he might not be quite like Trent, he's kind of, or he could kind of be almost like another attacker for United, the way that that he is. I mean, his service, the delivery in his crosses is fantastic. You mentioned Cavani being a target man, and I think a lot of people who play FPL watched the Euros and watched how good he was, because Luke Shaw is currently the highest owned player in FPL right now at 53% owned. So I can't blame anyone for having him. I have him in my team. I believe you have him as well.
I do.
And I think at 5.5, the price is perfect.
It's reasonable for him, for what he can bring.
Exactly. For what he can bring. I mean, last year he had a goal, 5 assists, and 10 clean sheets. 124 points, which is pretty good. And I imagine he's going to do better this season if he can stay fit, especially with Varane going to Man United. I imagine they're going to get more clean sheets than they did last year. So you're getting that as well as the offensive threat for Luke Shaw. I think for me, he's a must-own to start the season. And the one thing that's nice about spending up on defenders to start, although I don't recommend getting more than 2, so in this case, for me, it's Trent and Luke Shaw, you can sell them and find a pretty decent defender kind of at 5.0. 4.5 this year is not as good as in previous seasons, I think, but you can find cheaper defenders. Let's say after a while my forwards need help or my midfield needs help. Although I don't want to, I could sell Trent and go down to like a 5.0 defender who's going to get me clean sheets, maybe the odd attacking return, and then use that $2.5 million elsewhere in my team. So I think it's definitely worth it, because the thing is with defenders, especially defenders who attack, you get the clean sheet potential, and you get potential goals and potential assists, and they are bonus point machines. Trent almost always getting bonus points for Liverpool if he's done something other than just a clean sheet. If he gets a goal and assist, he's probably getting bonus points too. Luke Shaw, same thing. Last year he had 22 bonus points. Trent had 26 bonus points last year. And if you compare that to someone like Mo Salah last year, he only had 21 bonus points last year, which is less than both those defenders. So I think if you can find somebody who's like a bonus point magnet like these defenders who offer so much more than just clean sheets, it's worth paying up. But you definitely want to balance things out with cheaper defenders. We mentioned the 4.0 defender from Liverpool. There's a few, I think, who you could target. Leicester City had an injury, unfortunately, to Fofana.
So, I hate that. Love, what a good player, dude.
Yeah. So I mean,
unfortunate.
Very unfortunate. So
Amarte.
Amarte is going to take over to start the season, most likely. Daniel Amarte, priced at 4.0.
Not bad, 4.0, Leicester City.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky part with 4.0 defenders is, let's say Leicester, I mean, when Johnny Evans comes back from injury, or if they make a signing, it's not the long-term play. Same with what's his name? Tsimikas, the Greek defender from Liverpool. They're not great long-term options, but to start the season, if you need that flexibility, or even just to have one defender. Let's say you play 3 at the back all season. You want a 4th defender who can come off the bench in case you need him, or to rotate with. That 5th defender might never actually matter. So having a 4.0 defender that doesn't play is not the worst thing in the world. You don't always get a 4.0 legend like John Lundstrom was a few years ago. So sometimes you hit on a 4.0 player and it works, and sometimes you don't. So don't feel, if you have someone like Brandon Williams on Man U, I mean, or who else is there? Ben Johnson on West Ham. There's a lot of players who are 4.0 who will never see the light of day in FPL, or
Shane
probably
Duffy. Maybe he'll see some time.
Shane Duffy. Right. There's a lot of these guys that you can just kind of stash, and hopefully you never need to rely on them. But my strategy on defense is always 1 or 2 premiums. So in this case, I have Trent at 7.5, Luke Shaw at 5.5, and then I have 2 4.5 players and a 4.0. So it's kind of a good balance at the back there, and it allowed me to have a strong midfield and 2 mid-range forwards as well.
Luke Ayling, another player from Leeds, definitely to keep an eye on. Goalkeeper, Marty, finally, why should goalkeeper be the pay-down spot? I mean, we talked about it off the top, but I think we need to reiterate. You as well, never paid up for a keeper, probably never will. Gave me the cheapest keeper who has a chance at making some saves, potentially some wins and some clean sheets, and I'll lock him in, and I'll keep him in there for basically the entire season if I can. Yeah,
I think this is one where I don't know why you would ever... I mean, sometimes strategically, maybe on a wild card, maybe on a free hit, you bring in Ederson or De Gea, Alisson, one of these top goalkeepers on a good team. Like if you're like 99% sure you're getting a clean sheet from them, or they have 2 great fixtures in a double game week, maybe it makes sense. But if you're a set and forget player in terms of goalkeepers, a lot of people like to rotate goalkeepers. Maybe they have a 5.0 and a 4.5. Well, why not just go with a 4.5 and a 4.0? Leave them as is, and that's one less decision you have to make every week. Or even if you go with two 4.5 goalkeepers, you're going to make mistakes over the course of the season. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to,
of course,
right? And it drives me crazy. Like I have tried the alternating 4.5s in the past, and it drives me crazy. So for me, I'm a 4.0 pretty much always. I have had a 5.0 goalkeeper in the past, but the thing with 4.0 goalkeepers is you get the bang for your buck for sure. If you look at last year, two of the top three goalkeepers in terms of scoring were 4.5 goalkeepers. We had Emiliano Martinez, who started the season at 4.5. I think he finished because of player purchases at 5.3. He was the top goal scorer in the league.
He had a great season.
And Melier from Leeds was also a 4.5 price goalkeeper. He finished third in scoring last year. So you can get very good goalkeeping from 4.5 price players. And even, you have to kind of think to yourself, even if I pay up for a goalkeeper, is it worth having to go downgrade a defender or downgrade a midfielder in your team? Or two, depending on how much you're willing to spend. The one thing that I will tell any new player is there's almost no point in having two goalkeepers if you're going with two starting goalkeepers who are more than 4.5. Like I've seen people on Twitter, like they'll have a draft and they'll have like Ederson and then their backup is like Nick Pope. It's like, and I mean, new players, I understand. Like I don't want to to judge them and stuff, but
hey man, don't be a hater, Marty.
How many times are you going to play Nick Pope over Ederson? Probably not that many. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just such a waste of money, and
right.
You'll do so much better with. I mean, the alternating keeper route does work sometimes, but for me, it's set and forget position, especially at 4.5. The options this year aren't incredible, if I'm honest. Obviously, I mentioned Sanchez earlier. Who else do we have? We have Bachman's an option. Yeah, I just don't love the options. But for me, Sanchez is a good option. He scored 101 points last year. I know there's a big gap between him and Emi Martinez if you look at him and last year's top goalkeeper. But the thing is with Sanchez is he didn't have any penalty saves. If he saves a penalty, he had 10 clean sheets. If he gets a few more clean sheets and just the minutes played, if he plays every minute this season for Brighton as their starting goalkeeper, that 101 points from last year is easily going to be probably 140 this year, which really bridges the gap. And for $1 million less, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, and he's a good keeper. And like I said, if Brighton can invest in their attackers, find a decent striker, I think they're going to win a lot more games this season. So hopefully that happens for Sanchez owners like you and I. You wanted to touch on this quickly, Marty, formations.
Yeah, I think formation, just quickly to touch on this, most people play 3-4-3. It's kind of the most tried and true formation. You get three forwards. Everybody thinks of forwards as being the best option of getting goals, but I think now that we find a lot of wingers who are practically forwards on some teams listed as midfielders, 3-5-2, especially this year with the budget forwards or mid-range forwards and really the good differential and value players you can find in the midfield, 3-5-2 is a very viable option this year. And for me in the past, I think 3-4-3 has always been something I've rolled with. It feels good. You don't have a forward on your bench. You have a backup midfielder and two backup defenders. But this year, I think just based on the pricing and how players are positioned as well, 3-5-2 is a really good option. 4-4-2, not something I like to roll with, just because especially if you don't have too many attacking defenders, as soon as a clean sheet's gone, your defender's probably not getting into anything else. So I pretty much always roll with three at the back unless I'm forced to play four due to injury or something like that. But I think this is the year, if you're ever going to sway outside of a 3-4-3, I think this is the year to consider 3-5-2 for sure.
I agree. Okay, Marty, that's FPL. Hope you guys enjoyed that FPL breakdown. We're going to come at you every week. We're going to preview the game weeks, give you some captain picks, transfer news, everything. I mean, injury news. We're going to try and hit everything for you for the rest of the season. That's something we actually didn't touch on, Marty, heading into this game week. Captain pick. I think it's a no-brainer. Mohamed Salah.
Yeah, no doubt.
Right? I mean, why? We talked about it. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS method. Why are we going to go crazy for it?
Exactly.
Mohamed Salah.
Yeah, I think it's the only option this week for sure. You look at, it's the best fixture on paper. He's arguably, I won't say he's the best player on FPL, but he's the top in the top 3 for sure. So keep it simple. If you have him in your team, if you're one of the 50% of people who does, you're doing something right. So just captain him for sure.
All right, Marty, let's finish it off with something I hate doing.
Yeah.
Predicting the table. I hate it. It's the worst thing to do because we're always wrong. We're never right. I mean, we might be right about, the champions, which it's usually Manchester City, who we both have. But let's begin with the bottom 3. You start on your side.
Yeah, so on my side, from the bottom, I put Watford finishing last. There's just something about this Watford team that doesn't scream to me that they're going to stay up. So I have Watford finishing last, Norwich City finishing 19th. I think although they have improved defensively, if you look at where they were last time they were in the Premier League versus this time, I worry about the amount of goals they're going to score. So I have them going down. And this is the year Burnley's finally going down. You're probably, I know you're going to probably disagree with me just because I see your bottom 3 beside mine, but this is the year Burnley's finally going down.
Dude, they're not. Sean Dyche will never let it happen. There's no way. I'm going with Norwich at the bottom. I'm the same with you. Defensively, they've gotten better, but I just don't think it's enough. And the goals, I mean, losing Emiliano Buendia, that's huge. He was their chief playmaker. He was the heart of their midfield and one of the heart of a big piece of their attack. So I think Norwich goes down. Watford as well. I agree with you. I do like a lot of players on Watford. Sarr, Domingos Quina, who I think is going to be a very good player. And obviously I like Troy Deeney as well, but I think they're going to go back down. At 18th, not Burnley, but Crystal Palace. I'm not sold on Patrick Vieira at all as a manager. He hasn't really succeeded anywhere he's gone so far. Palace, yes, they do have Zaha, so you can always count on him to get them a few goals. And obviously he's one of the reasons why they do pick up wins every season, one of the reasons why they stay in the Premier League. But I mean, I don't like their defense. There's not much to like about this Crystal Palace side. They lost Andros Townsend. They haven't really upgraded anywhere. So I think Palace is going down, Marty.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, at this point of the season, it's so hard to predict, especially with the transfer window not being closed. We could see some more moves from any club. And that's kind of one thing that drives me crazy. I wish they would shut the transfer window 24 hours before the season would start. It would just make things so much easier in FPL, which really all roads lead back to FPL for me. So just close the transfer window before the season starts. Our predictions will be better. Our teams will be better for it. And so we'll see. I think I agree with what you're saying about Palace. I don't think they'll be great, but I do have them staying up. So we'll see.
Okay, instead of doing just the top 4, let's do the top 7 instead. So you start with your 7-1, and I'll go for my 7-1. Very similar, except for maybe 1 or 2 spots here.
Do we have the same? Oh no, there's a few different. Yeah.
There's a few differences.
So 7th, I have Spurs. The reason why I think Kane's going to leave Spurs. We were talking before we started recording. You have a gut feeling he's going to stay. For me, I think he's going to go.
Not because he wants to stay.
Yeah, not because he wants to stay, but for me,
Right.
I think he's going to go. And I think although even if they spend that money well, we saw what happened with the Gareth Bale money. It's hard for new players to come in and to the Premier League and adjust, especially if you have so many new additions. Not that they've done that so far, but I just think they might take a step back this year slightly.
Yeah.
So I have Spurs finishing 7th. I have Arsenal finishing ahead of them at 6th. Although I don't feel great about Arsenal, especially offensively, I worry about the amount of chances they're going to create. I worry about their goal scoring. I do think they will take a step forward. I like the Ben White signing. And from Christmas to the end of the season last year, they were actually 3rd in points in the Premier League. And defensively, they were pretty good overall last year. So I don't think they're going to bridge the gap that much between them and the top 4. But I do think they're going to have a bit of a bounce back this year and finish 6th. I have Leicester in 5th, finishing outside the Champions League. And for me, the top 4, I just can't see anybody breaking into it. I have Liverpool 4th. I think they will be better this year and stronger. Especially with Van Dijk back. I like the Konate signing. I think they need to replace Wijnaldum, which they haven't done yet. But so I have them 4th. I have Chelsea 3rd, Man United 2nd, and I just can't see how Man City don't win the league this year. So I have them.
I know. I'm in the same boat as you. I'm 7th. I'm going with Arsenal. 6th, Tottenham, more so just to get one on Marty and say Tottenham will finish above Arsenal. But to be completely honest with you, Arsenal, they don't have to worry about Europe this year. That's huge. Europa League travel is killer. They don't have that, and they still have a really good team. I'm not sold on the manager, but I think the players individually are very good. You still have Aubameyang, and I mentioned this to you off air. I think we were texting him. Aubameyang is a sleeping giant. He is still a world-class striker. Yes, he had a bad season. If he finds his confidence and starts finding the back of the net, it's going to change Arsenal's season completely, and they can really challenge for that top 5, potentially even that top 4, depending on how the rest of the season plays out. Then I have Spurs. It's going to be a tough season for them, especially if they have to sell Kane, being so close to the season, or when the season starts. It's tough to bring in new players who've had no preseason and trying to bring them and bring them up to speed with the team. So I think Spurs are going to be in a bit of trouble there. I've liked what I've seen from preseason, very attacking. They've upgraded the defense just a bit with a new center back signing, but yeah, I think 7th, 6th around there is where Spurs are going to finish. I'm with you. Leicester 5th place. I'm going United 4th, Liverpool 3rd, Chelsea 2nd, City 1st. But I will say this: if Chelsea sign Romelu Lukaku, to me, Chelsea are the favorites. They seem to have City's number, and for whatever reason, Thomas Tuchel is the only manager in the history of managers where that new manager bounce, it doesn't exist. It just stays. They haven't regressed. They kept on progressing. The guy comes in and wins them the Champions League with a stellar defense. Now you're adding one of the best strikers in the world. I mean, they have to be favorites.
Yeah, I definitely agree. They're going to be one of the favorites.
I mean, you could say the same thing about City if they had Kane, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Grealish was a great signing too. The fact that City can field 2 totally different 11s that are, top 6 at least, maybe even top 4 teams, it's crazy. So the depth there, I just think that's what's going to get them to that. Well, holding the trophy again next year, the Premier League title holders. I just think they have that swagger. I think Jack Grealish is fantastic, and I really think they're going to sign Kane. I could be wrong. We'll see how this ages, but even if they don't, I think they're still winning the Premier League. So
I know they really want the Champions League. I wonder if that is number 1 priority for Manchester City. Not saying that they wouldn't want to win the Premier League as well, but there's a lot of pressure on Pep. He was brought in, to win the league a couple of times, but really to win the Champions League. So he needs to do that, and I think he needs to do that soon, and that could be the main priority for them. But nonetheless, it's going to be a good season. I think it's the first time in a while where we can say, hey, maybe there's, another team who can actually challenge City at the top outside of Liverpool. So it's nice. Hopefully there's a big battle at the top end of the table and at the bottom. Should we finish with top scorer? I mean, if Lukaku comes in,
sure.
He's actually, you know what I mean? He's a part of that. Harry Kane. But based on right now, the squads that everyone has right now, who's your top scorer?
I'm going with Harry Kane. I think he's going to, I imagine he's going to, even if he stays at Spurs, he's going to score 20-plus goals. He's going to be hungrier than ever, I think, to prove himself after what happened at the Euros. Not that he didn't have a good Euros necessarily, or played poorly, but I just think that fire under him of, I don't want to, say like, he hasn't won a trophy yet, but that's going to be weighing on him. And although he may do it this season, depending on what happens with his career, I think that fire is going to be lit under him, and he's going to be coming out guns a-blazing. If it's at Spurs, we know he has the partnership with Son that's going to work. Yeah. If it's at Man City, how does he not score 25-plus goals, right? So for me, it's got to be Harry Kane.
Yeah, I like Kane as well. I mean, one player I also want to mention is Mohamed Salah. I think, you mentioned, I think Liverpool are going to be hungrier than ever this year. Last season was a bit disappointing, not because they were just overall not as good as they've been in recent seasons, but a lot of injuries, just unlucky. So I think Salah has a shout there. And even Cavani, give Cavani a full season. You never know what that guy can do, considering Manchester United are very attacking. They've added Sancho. You still got Rashford there, Mason Greenwood, Bruno Fernandes. A very good team. So it's going to be an interesting season, an interesting year for sure. That's it, Marty, for the first FPL show of the Premier League season. I don't even know what to call this. I guess let's just call it, I don't know, the Alan Marty Show.
We'll think of something.
No, we're going with it. The Alan Marty Show, Episode 1, FPL. Thank you for joining me. You're the best. I'll see you next week, and we'll see everybody next week with some more fantasy Premier League advice. Also, subscribe to the channel to make sure that you get all of the updates and all of the videos and the content we put out here. I'm going to be doing some Premier League betting stuff as well, FPL with Marty, and hopefully some more as the season goes on. So thanks for watching. Hit the like button. Love you guys.